Debt limit talks come to an agreement. The key takeaways from the meeting and the risk of default. Let's talk about it. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reached an agreement late Saturday to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for limits on future spending and other demands from Republicans, just days before a potential default. However, the White House was able to leave the president's most important domestic programs intact while fending off the more drastic budget cutbacks that House Republicans proposed in their own plan. As a result of criticism from both conservative Republicans and progressive Democrats in Congress, the future of the accord is currently questionable. The House is expected to vote on McCarthy's bill, which he has nicknamed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, on Wednesday. Here are some key points about the debt ceiling agreement's contents and shortcoming. The debt ceiling is raised until 2025. A default that could occur on June 5 if the debt ceiling is not raised would be avoided by the tentative agreement, which would raise the debt ceiling through the end of 2024. Biden's first priority has always been this. A default would cause an economic catastrophe that the administration could not afford. The two-year extension would prevent Congress from having to address the debt ceiling until after the 2024 election, which could reshuffle the balance of power in Congress and the presidency. The brinksmanship of this year would not occur if Biden is re-elected and the Democrats take back the House. Limits on spending for 2 years. The agreement sets a 2-year limit on annual discretionary expenditure, keeping non-defense spending levels constant in 2019 and increasing it by 1% in 2025. As a result, all domestic programs funding aside from Social Security and Medicare will remain unchanged in 2019. Expenditure caps were a primary focus for Republicans, who first battled for 10 years of yearly expenditure caps before switching to 6 years as negotiations progressed. The agreement sets targets for appropriations for 6 years, but unlike the expenditure limitations for the first 2 years, the targeted spending amounts are not legally binding. Additionally, the accord provides increased money for better medical care for military veterans. Work requirements for SNAP and other aid are changing. A dispute over increased work requirements for assistance programs, which Republicans urged and the White House resisted, was the last obstacle to Biden and McCarthy reaching an agreement. The final agreement restructures the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program by establishing time restrictions for the duration of able-bodied persons 54 years of age or younger without dependent children receiving food stamps if they do not meet specific employment criteria. However, the agreement would increase food benefits for veterans and the homeless, which is a gain for the White House. The agreement includes more work requirements for temporary assistance for needy families' beneficiaries, but there are no changes to Medicaid, which Vice President Biden warned he would not support. Rejects certain IRS funding. The agreement takes back $10 billion of the $80 billion in IRS funds approved as part of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act last year, which was intended to target big businesses and individuals who cheat taxes. This is another surrender to Republicans. Republicans in Congress have long used the additional budget for the IRS as a talking point, warning that 87,000 new IRS auditors and regulators will be probing into the lives of hardworking Americans. The funds are intended to update an understaffed tax collecting agency in an effort to catch wealthy tax evaders. The tax gap, which measures the discrepancy between taxes payable and taxes actually collected, has increased significantly, rising from $441 billion annually between 2011 and 2013 to $584 billion in 2019. It is predicted to reach $7 trillion during the following 10 years. Cancels unpaid money for COVID-19 rescue. The agreement will recover billions in COVID-19 relief funds that was approved by Congress under the Biden and Trump presidencies, fulfilling another Republican rallying cry. According to a letter distributed by House Republican leadership, the rollbacks include cutting $400 million from the Global Health Fund of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Advocates for public health have raised worries that withdrawing cash may hinder attempts to get ready for the next epidemic and take money away from a system that has been chronically underfunded. Democrats in the House said that additional funding was still required to retain vital medical supplies in the strategic national stockpile. There are no taxes on the rich or companies. By reversing former President Donald Trump's 2017 tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and corporations and closing tax loopholes used by the super wealthy, Biden sought to balance spending cuts with higher income.
But taxes are not at all mentioned in the agreement negotiated with McCarthy.
Biden is likely to make his call for affluent Americans to pay their fair share in taxes a focal point of his re-election campaign if the tax code is left unaltered. Student loan forgiveness is still allowed under the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act, the president's landmark legislation on the environment and prescription drugs, as well as the president's initiative to eliminate student loan debt for millions of Americans, were successfully preserved by the White House. In legislation enacted last month by the GOP-controlled House, Republicans suggested removing both. The biggest modification to student loan policy would be to force borrowers who have been given suspensions of their regular payments due to the pandemic to start repaying the government. The modification would effectively put into law Biden's proposal to resume payments following the Supreme Court's consideration of his student loan forgiveness plan. All in all, it would appear there was some give and take to be had from both sides. But what do you think? What do you agree with, and what do you feel should have been removed, changed, or tossed out completely? Share your comments below with this JargoBiz audience. We will be sure to bring more updates about this subject and other topics that could impact your bottom line. Be sure to like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for stopping by.